So, yeah, if you could hear, William Lane Craig was actually groaning as the guy was asking him the question. You could hear it in the pain in his voice. And Ross made a similar answer in Philosophia Christi that William Lane Craig knows full well that he believes in the Trinity. No, we don't know that, Ross. We only know what you say. And what you say is that you presented a doctrine of the Trinity that is not Christian. Okay? So I'm going to continue on here, and I want you to do this. Now, William Lane Craig correctly identifies Ross's basic tenet in the Beyond Cosmos is that certain physicists suggest that in addition to the four temporal dimensions that we have, spatial dimensions, there exist six compacted spatial dimensions carried with an enormous theological freight. Okay? There's a lot of arguments in physics that there's 10 physical dimensions, and the other six are curled in on each other. I have no problem with those extra dimensions existing. My problem is when you start using those extra dimensions to, solve a problem of the Trinity, or when you increase the number of dimensions to 130 billion, because that's how many people you think have ever existed, okay? It's not there. But William Lane, Craig is going to continue in his writing, and this is from the thing, saying that Ross does in fact conceive of God as literally taking on extra dimensions. Okay? Ross could not be more explicit in his rejection of divine timelessness. And then he quotes Ross as saying, "My choice of the word timeful to describe God's time-related capabilities or capacities deliberately contradicts a notion that much of the church has held and taught for many centuries, a notion of a timeless eternity as a realm where God lives and where we will live someday." Okay? God does inhabit eternity. That's what the Bible says. And I'm sorry for Hugh Ross that he's having trouble with that, but that's what Scripture says. And he has a different idea of those things, right? And this is, these quotes are all coming from Philosophia Christi, okay? And I just picked out part of it. William Lane Craig's explanation of this problem goes on for pages and pages. I couldn't do the whole thing. That's why I'm suggesting that you all read it, right? Now, in the printed version of Philosophia Christi, not the one that's on Hugh Ross's website, there's actually drawings that lay this out, and the drawings are very helpful. Okay? And my hard copy of this article burned up in my house. So I want you, where am I at? Am I in the wrong slide here for you guys? I think I have something haywire. Okay, we're good. Now, William Lane Craig's going to continue. While I agree God ought to be thought of as temporal, meaning that God operates within time, since creation, and Craig's idea is that God added a dimension of time that he functions in when he created time, okay? Ross's account of God temporally strikes me as multiply flawed and inadequately motivated. To deal with the second point first, Ross rejects divine timelessness because such a doctrine would imply that God exists where causes and effects do not happen, and the idea contradicts biblical teachings. And that's from page 66 of Beyond the Cosmos, right? In what has to be the most whopping understatement in the whole book, Ross muses, to be fair, Augustine and Aquinas probably did not see a connection between time and cause and effect to the degree people in contemporary science do. Wow, that's true. They Augustine and Aquinas were not looking at that. Ross's account of God's temporality is problematic, and then the 4 is his footnote. I just copied it right out there. His answer to the problem of God in the beginning of time is to postulate a second time dimension a sort of hypertime in which God exists and created the world. Now we need to be very clear as to what hypertime would be. It would be a succession of hyper moments at each of which our entire time dimension exists. Okay? This all sounds like gobbledygook to you, probably, right? Because this is how people, when you start talking about time and timelessness and atemporality, this is the language. And I couldn't reproduce the images from William Lane Craig, but I want you to understand they really help you understand why this is a problem. But I thought Ross's earlier video thing showing Jesus suffering on 130 billion timelines for eternity ought to be enough evidence of why this is problematic. And Ross asserts that the charge to Trinitarians accept a mathematical absurdity would seem appropriate if the biblical God were confined to the same dimensional realities of humans. That's Ross on page 82. This amounts to saying that the denial of God's extra dimensionality is sufficient condition of the doctrine of the Trinity being logically absurdity. I, being William Lane Craig, take this to be an enormously serious allegation. So does William Donahue. Okay? For it implies that Athanasius, Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, and every major theologian you can think of, and other champions of the Trinitarian doctrine who did not believe God's extra dimensionality as Ross understands it, were all advocating a logical incoherence, and that anyone accepting the doctrine of the Trinity was believing a logical contradiction. In fact, however, Ross never shows how that traditional formulation of Trinity or even apparently contradictory, because he's not using our definition. There is not even the appearance of contradiction in affirming that there is only one true God, but in the unity of Godhead there are three eternal and co-equal persons. Page 88, citing from Rhine. Okay? If there were a contradiction, positing God's existence in extra spatial dimensions would not solve it. At best, then, Ross appeals to extra dimensionality only to illustrate how three can be one. But as an illustration of the Trinity, Ross's scenario of three dimensional hand intersecting a two-dimensional surface seems no more adequate than the well-known deficient illustrations he criticizes. When flatlanders see a finger of a hand intersecting a plane in a different way, they never discern that the six plus manifestations were all governed by the one entity and the one source operation. That's from page 93. Flatlanders was a paper where it described us living in a two-dimensional plane, height and width, and you draw a circle like on a paper. In a three-dimensional being can move their finger from outside the circle to inside the circle without ever punching the side of the circle, because all you got to do is lift your finger off the page and go down. And that's why Ross is using a flatlander example, and by adding up all these extra dimensions of time, he can just move through time in the same way. But Craig says this amounts to an illustration of modalism. I told you before, modalism is one God putting on three different masks, not the Trinity. Later, Ross imagines flatlanders seeing this universal intersection of the hand's finger with their plane, commenting the two-ness, three-ness, and more-ness of the hand, or one aspect of the plurality they could imagine, but not the oneness. And that's Ross on page 95. But the fingers are merely part of the one hand, and Ross himself earlier quoted from the Augsburg Confession that the term person is used as the ancient fathers employed it in connection to signify not part or quality of another, but that which subsisted of itself. The hand in Flatland illustration thus only succeeds in illustrating modalism, which is a Christian heresy, Christological heresy. I want you to, Ross keeps defending a Christological heresy. And he succeeds in illustrating modalism, or one thing having three parts. It certainly does not make the Trinity more intelligible. Craig's going to continue. Ross also believes that God's extra dimensionality serves to illume Christology. Unfortunately, although Ross clearly affirms that Jesus is both God and man, It may be justifiably doubted whether he affirms the Chalcedon formulation of the two natures in the one person. And this is why the Chalcedon is where we got Jesus has a completely divine nature and a completely human nature in the one person of Jesus. Okay? And that he says, even though Ross says he does affirm that, it based on what he says, you can't conclude that he actually does. The second person of the triune God, this is him quoting Ross, right? The triune God, the creator of all angels in the entire earth, actually became man. God supernaturally entered the womb of the Virgin Mary. How he interacted with and modified Mary's egg is not made clear in Scripture, but he became flesh and blood in the embryo. That's not what Christianity teaches. God didn't change. The nature of God, the second person of the Trinity that entered Mary's womb, never stopped being God. He didn't become man. Man, in Mary's embryo, the nature of man and the nature of God united in the one person of Jesus. God did not change into a man. Okay? Again, you can listen to the last sermon in Joseph Smith's life before he is killed, and he says God became man so that men will become God. Okay? This is not Christian theology. Okay? William Lane Craig continues, this remarkable statement suggests that Ross stands on the Alexandrian tradition of one nature Christology, such as the conception seems to require God's relinquishing some of his divine attributes in becoming man, and this is just what Ross affirms. This Alexandrian tradition, this is what the Oriental Orthodox Church holds, that the two natures merged into one new nature, and that the person of Jesus is a hybrid of God and man, not that the two natures remain separate and distinct. That's your third circle out in my bullseye. Okay? And coming to earth as an embryo in a virgin's womb, this is Ross's words, Christ emptied himself, leaving behind extra-dimensional realm and capacities. He shared with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit. When he completed his work, the work he set out to do, the work of redemption, he returned to the place and the powers he had left behind. That's Ross on page 49 of his book. Craig says this passage constitutes an endorsement of kinetic theology. Kinetic is the emptying, that the nature of God got rid of some of his divine attributes, okay, which interprets Christ emptying himself as the divestiture of certain divine attributes. Now this sort of non-Chalcedon kenotic Christology seems to me a very serious aberration. Absolutely. Okay? As the Antiochian theologians realized, if Christ had only a single theanthropic, that's the one nature, half God, half man, then he was in fact neither God nor man, but a sort of hybrid of the two. Kenotic theology, sometimes you'll see this written as kenosis, okay? Kenotic theology faces the severe difficulty of how it is that God can give up attributes, since any being lacking such attributes such as omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, aseity, and so forth, by definition is not God. If he gave up those attributes, he's no longer God. As is typical Ches kenotic theologians, Ross would preserve Christ's deity by means of a continuity of his moral attributes. Jesus' divine identity as God, his character, his wisdom, his purity, and his motive remain perfectly intact. But he voluntarily relinquished the independent use of his divine attributes and his extra-dimensional capacities. That's from pages 103 and 104 in Ross's book. Okay? This is, I'm hoping you're seeing how bad this is, right? Now, earlier I had told you about the big three in Christian theology. I've showed you, without the you, I showed you, okay? The Ross has already deviated from the nature of God. He deviated from the nature of Christ. When he puts 130 billion Christ uncrossed on 130 billion timelines for eternity, he deviates from the nature of salvation. In the next section, William Lane Craig is going to show you that he deviates from the nature of salvation. William Lane Craig says, Ross's non-Chalcedon Christology leads to a bizarre view of the atonement. Traditionally, Jesus is understood to have died in his human nature, but his divine nature is, of course, incapable of perishing. God cannot die. But if Christ has only a single nature, then his death is literally the death of God. Thus, in a section entitled God Both Dead and Alive, Ross seems to affirm precisely what the title states, that at a point, God was both dead and alive. This is nonsensical stuff. Craig says, some skeptics and atheists have argued that if Jesus were God, he could not have died. This is Ross speaking again, right? And if he died, he could not have been God. They recognize, of course, the contradiction of saying that Jesus is both really dead and really alive. The simultaneity of Jesus' death and immortality would only be a contradiction, however, if the time, place, and context of his death were identical to the time, place, and dimensional context of his being alive. So Ross is saying he's dead some places and alive other places. Because Christ's identity as God, he has access to all the dimensions or super dimensions that God encompasses. He could experience suffering and death in all the human occupied dimensions, and then transition into his other dimension of realms once the atonement price has been paid. And that's from pages 108 and 109 of his book. Okay? So here, Ross does seem to affirm that God was both dead and alive, but that contradiction is avoided by his extra dimensionality. But this escape does not seem to work, for Ross had clearly affirmed that in the incarnation, God the Son has left his extra dimensional realms and capacities he shared with the Father in the Spirit. Thus, if he died in our human realm, God died. How could he then transition to extra dimensional realm once he had died? It seems inexplicable. In any case, the logical problem here is not that just God being both dead and alive, but God being dead, period. By definition, God cannot perish. But without two natures Christology, we're forced to affirm the absurdity that God died. Okay? Like I said, these aren't minor issues from Ross. This is central Christian doctrine. And he's losing on 3 out of 3. Right? Nature of God, nature of Christ, nature of salvation. He's teaching heresy on all 3. Right? William Lane Craig continues his destruction of the theology of Ross that has been teaching for decades. Craig says, extra dimensionality leads Ross into an even more bizarre speculation that the atonement is the answer to the question of how one man's death could pay for all of people's sins. That's the video I showed you. Instead of answering that question in terms of the dignity of Christ's persons, that Jesus was worth enough to pay for the price of everybody, he hypothesizes a perpendicular to our time dimension is another dimension composed of billions of separate timelines, on each of which Christ suffers death and subsequent isolation from God for infinite time. On all those dimensions of time, Jesus is eternally separated from God. That's heresy of the first order. Craig says, I find this speculation profoundly unacceptable. It requires, in effect, billions of Christs, thus destroying Christ's personal identity. For it is a distinct person who dies on the cross in each of these timelines. Moreover, each of these Christs suffers separation from God endlessly with no hope of resurrection or victory at the end. Thus, Christ rises in temporal dimension in our time, right? Is the exception to the rule. The other Christ remains separated from God forever, which makes a mockery of Jesus' triumph over death. William Lane Craig's exactly correct. He continues, Ross also makes a curious suggestion concerning Jesus' resurrection appearances in disappearing from view. Jesus rotated each of his 3 spatial dimensions into a 4th, 5th, and 6th spatial dimension, respectively, on page 46 to 47. Jesus' resurrected body thus literally came apart and became 3 one-dimensional lines. It's not really a very robust view of a body. That's what I was trying to explain to you with the Flatlanders. He's saying he entered in all these other dimensions, and he was able to enter in the upper room through a 6-sided box, the floor, ceiling, and 4 sides, without penetrating any of the sides. Okay? Now, I'm not going to continue with Craig's thing. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to suggest you all. I gave you the links. Go read Philosophia Christi. Read it in its entirety. If you have any questions about what I'm saying, or you want to see Craig's full explanation, or Ross's weak defense, right? But what it clearly shows, in addition to whatever problems I might have with Hugh Ross, I have found him to be dishonest in his scholarship, and his claims about science are demonstrably false. If you go to Hugh Ross's website and you get the list of all the evidences, that he uses to prove that the Bible, I'm going to just tell you, you're going to get egg on your face, because anybody that knows much about science is gonna smear you with them. A lot of his evidences are absolutely demonstrably false, and some of them you should know if you passed 8th grade science. He's got a PhD. I have those problems with him. I have problems with somebody who's dishonest in their scholarship, makes false statements about other people. But I'm focusing on his theology, and his theology is the most concerning thing to me, right? This is not a dispute over the age of the universe. When Miguel Laforni and I originally did a Prophet Club episodes, we focused on false prophets and false teachers who deviated Christian orthodoxy at core doctrines. I showed you how Robin Bullock and Kat Kerr butcher the Trinity, right? Not only are they false prophets, they're false teachers, right? When we did Medic, I told you he's a huckster and a shyster, and he's teaching all kinds of nonsense to make money, and we focused on that. I wasn't so much focused on his core theology. But Ross is a false teacher who should be avoided and denounced for his heretical teachings. I don't know any way to defend Hugh Ross and what he teaches. It's indefensible. And people like Fuzz Reyna that are there, or other theologians that work at Reasons to Believe, I don't know how they can still do it. And, yeah. So, at this point, it's my pattern in policy is I put on a song. I'm going to go try to look through the chats. I crashed my online one, so if you were in DLive or any of the chats that are on the Restream thing, and you sent me a question or comment, you may have to type it back in, because everything went away when that just wouldn't let me in. I had to keep identifying sidewalks and motorcycles and stuff, and it wouldn't let me in. I had to restart the chat completely. So if you're on those platforms, retype it and I'll take a look at it. If you're on YouTube, welcome back to the conversation, and I could take your comment from there. But I'm going to put a song on. I'm going to go look at the chat, and then I will come back and talk to you. I'm assuming there's going to be a bunch of things. Let me do. No, I don't need 118. I'll do it quick. I'm going to do the groove version of these. That's long enough that it should let me get through all these different chats, and I'll be back and see you in just a minute.
worship you alone. You will come to take me home.
You are all I ever need. Jesus, you have set me free. I will worship you alone. You will come to take me home. You are all I ever
You're all I need.
Jesus, you have set me
You'll set me free.
I will worship you
I will worship you.
You will come to take me home.
I've fallen on my knees. I will bless the Lord. Do, 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 do. Oh, oh, oh.
Okay, so we're back. So yeah, sword. I think there is no excuse for people that have let this go on, and to do that, and it can be crazy. And what's happening and Singing Pretty, I see that you hadn't heard Ross saying it. That's why I thought I had to bring the receipts, because not everybody has. Not everybody's going to read all his books or understand the implications of what he's saying sometimes, because they talk in what seems like scientific gobbledygook to a certain degree. And I'll give you an example. I've never heard Fazl Rainer Fuzz say anything anywhere remotely as heretical as Hugh Ross, the current CEO of Reasons to Believe. But he used to go to church with my brother. They had him at the pulpit. He spoke from the pulpit and was peddling some of the scientific nonsense that I had mentioned on the Reasons to Believe website. My brother challenged him on easily demonstrably false statements. Fuzz ended up leaving the church, felt like he was disrespected and left the church. But the fact was, that pastor put him on the pulpit, let him speak lies to a congregation that are not scientifically trained and wouldn't know they were lies, assuming that congregation is going to go repeat those lies out in the field in defense of the faith. And I think when you take a position of pastor, teacher, what I'm doing, you have a responsibility to make sure to the best of your ability that what you say is true and verified. And I take it very serious, that responsibility, and we ought to. There needs to be some kind of way to hold Christians accountable for what they teach. And I'm telling you, I just showed you Norman Geisler. I probably learned more from Norman Geisler as a Christian than any other single teacher. I have a lot of respect for Norman Geisler. I think his view on inerrancy is nonsensical, but I learned a lot from him. And for him to list him as one of science's greatest, you've seen what William Lane Craig did to his theology of Ross, and he starts out his thing by saying, yeah, he's one of Christianity or evangelical's greatest scientific apologists. No, he's not. He's not even teaching evangelical Christianity, So when you have leaders in the church that aren't willing to stand up and call a spade, or to say, hey, this is not some minor area of disagreement where we can agree to disagree. This nature God, nature Christ, nature salvation stuff, we have to stand and say this person is teaching heresy. That's crazy. And even as much as you've seen it pain William Lane Craig when he got that question that Ross was still teaching this nonsense, he still tried to give him cover. Like trying to say, well, Ross admitted he was just doing this. He was just saying this. So he's just a liar instead of a false teacher? I mean, what do you want to do here? So this gets to be problematic. And that's why I brought him out. And that's why I told you at the beginning of the thing, I don't take this lightly. I don't call people false teachers just to make waves or whatever be out there. I felt like I had to bring the receipts. And if you think I didn't, I don't know. But I always create a PDF when I'm done. Okay, where's that slide? I'll do that right now. Down here on the, on where it says show notes available on Discerning Truth Script, I'll create a PDF what I had up on the slide so you can get the links and all that. But I'm also going to put up on Telegram a letter I wrote to Ross. And then I subsequently edited that letter and I marked all my edits, clearly marked them. And I published it online when I was still trying to reach him and get him to change, trying to not bring it out 100% public, right? And I'll put a PDF of that letter up there, and you can see, and that deals with a lot of the other things, the dishonesty in his scholarship. Okay, and I'm going to post that all on the Telegram group. Give me a minute after I get off. I have to save the program, do all that stuff, and then within 30 minutes it should be up there. But if I missed your question, or if you were over there on DLive, I see a couple of people got back over there, but if you were on DLive when the chat crashed and I didn't see your question, just email me, bill@discerningtruth.com. I'll answer you. If you want to watch the replay, all my replays are on Cloud Hub, on Rumble. Discerning Truth, this is going to be on YouTube. It's going to be a two-parter, and you're not going to have the videos because they can't put them up on YouTube, right? But it'll be in the playlist on YouTube called False Teachers, False Prophets, False Teachers. Same thing with Rumble, to where he belongs, right there with every other false teacher, right? I said, I've been posting on Substack recently. I just had an interesting conversation with somebody that is, I believe he's Messianic Jew. I haven't asked him yet, but based on his responses, I think he's part of Messianic Judaism. We've been talking about the place of the law. And, are Christians bound by the law? Interesting thing up there if you want to read it on Substack. And I broadcast 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Monday and Wednesday, I'm in Ezekiel right now. I'm in a book of the Bible. We're currently in Ezekiel. When I get to chapter 37, I'm going to have some new art from Sword. Okay? But right now, I'm, 32, 33? I lost track. But they'll be back there on Monday, God willing. And then Wednesday will be in Ezekiel. On Tuesday, I'm usually on with Neo. She's back. As far as I know, I'm joining her next Tuesday. She broadcasts around 10:30 Central Time. Mine are always listed as Pacific Time. And then I always promote my good friend Michael Beatty, Miguel, California. Michael was a singer-songwriter when I met him. He has turned into quite the memer and political advocate, and he also teaches the Bible 6 days a week. He's back in Samuel, been doing a great study in Samuel. He starts off his show in the morning at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time, some worship music, a proverb of the day based on the date of the month, and then short Bible study. On Wednesday, he comes on and prays for the nation. Michael is very busy. He mentioned in today's broadcast that I had asked him about the Julie Green Prophet Club thing, where I'm going to do the same kind of expose I just did on Hugh Ross. Bring the receipts. I don't call you a false prophet unless I can prove you're a false prophet. I can prove Julie Green's a false prophet. And she currently is the false prophet I get the most requests about. So it's just trying to get Michael and I with time in the same week to get that out there. I thought it was going to happen in January. We're now into February. It may be March before it comes out. Whenever it happens, it'll happen. But this is a kind of a taste of a prophet club. This is what we do. We take apart, show people in their own words what they say, and that they're either teaching false doctrine or they're whatever other way is going on. I'm going to check one of the other chats real quick, and I'll be right with you. Okay. So I think I got everything. And yeah, Smith Olson, yeah, what an ego. Yeah, the egos that come with some people are beyond belief, and I mean, I struggle with ego myself. Sometimes it's a hard thing for all of us. But imagine thinking that you know more than all the theologians that came before you, and you're not even a trained theologian. So it's just sad what happens when people get ahead of their game and outside their box that they understand. And I don't care if you got a PhD in engineering, that doesn't make you a theologian any more than having a PhD in theology makes you an engineer, right? If your degree is in science and you're going to tackle major theological problems, and theologians tell you what you've said is problematic, and you just keep telling you, then you're not open to correction, and that's a mark of like a cult leader, right? So I'm just suggesting you stay away from Hugh Ross, stay away from his books, stay out of the Reasons to Believe cult over there, because it is a bunch, it's a mess. So with that, I'm going to get out of here for today. Like I said, give me 30 minutes or so. I should have the notes up, and then go on. I will see you on Monday.